There's a moment when she looks at you from across the room. You feel that momentary connection, that second where her eyes meet yours, that pause that seems to last an eternity, and in that precise instant, something inside you tells you that you must act, that you must make a move, that you must show interest before that moment fades forever. Most men act immediately. They rush over too quickly, they flash exaggerated smiles, they throw out compliments that sound rehearsed, they send instant messages, they seek constant attention. On the surface, they seem interested, attentive, proactive. But underneath is obvious desperation, the screaming need for validation that women perceive from a mile away. And it's exactly in that second when they lose all their attractive power. Because obvious pursuit, no matter how sophisticated it seems, is a public admission of a value imbalance. The instant you pursue, you unconsciously hand over complete power of the dynamic. And that power, once voluntarily surrendered, never returns to your hands. In the next 28 minutes, I'm going to show you why a single gesture of strategic distancing generates more attraction than 100 direct approaches. At minute 8, you'll understand the invisible mistake that makes you seem needy, even when you're not at all. At 15 minutes, the exact technique applied in 3 real situations you'll face this week. At 22 minutes, the complete system that makes her unconsciously pursue you. Because here's the truth no one dares to tell you. He who pursues, loses. He who is pursued, dominates. If this has already made you reflect for a second, hit like now and let's go. Think of gravity as a powerful metaphor. Most people believe that to attract objects, you have to pull them towards you with force, with direct and obvious action. But true gravity, the one that moves entire planets, operates exactly the opposite way. It's an invisible force that attracts without apparent effort, that magnetizes without direct contact, that generates movement without pursuit. And it's precisely that personal gravity that we're going to build today, step by step. Let me explain exactly why this happens and where most people lose the game without realizing it. There's a fundamental mistake that 97% of men make when trying to generate attraction. This mistake is so normalized, so socially accepted, that we don't even recognize it as a problem. It's in movies, in songs, in friends' advice, even in relationship books. The idea that you must actively pursue someone you're interested in. Watch what happens in practice. The average man identifies a woman he's attracted to and begins the classic pursuit. Constant messages, immediate attention, total availability, plans at the first opportunity, premature compliments. The result is predictable. Initial interest followed by progressive distancing on her part. Meanwhile, the strategic man identifies interest but does the opposite. He maintains calculated distance, spaces of silence, intermittent attention, limited availability. The result, growing curiosity, unconscious pursuit, increased perceived value. The consequences of this error are devastating on multiple levels. In the short term, you lose immediate opportunities with women who were initially interested. In the medium term, you develop behavioral patterns that reinforce themselves with each failure. In the long term, you build a complete identity based on being the one who pursues, who works for attention, who needs external validation to feel self-worth. This behavior doesn't come from nowhere. It's programmed from childhood with constant messages. Fight for what you want. Show how much you care. Insist until you get it. Social conditioning tells us that love is earned with visible effort, with constant demonstration, with romantic pursuit. Added to this is a deep fear of rejection, the primary need for acceptance, and the unconscious belief that our worth must be constantly proven. It's like an inexperienced fisherman desperately churning the water trying to catch fish with his hands. The more he moves, the more noise he generates, and the further the fish swim away. Meanwhile, the experienced fisherman remains still, patient, strategic, allowing the fish to approach out of natural curiosity, a movement that seems magical to someone who doesn't understand the dynamic. Most seek direct and obvious attention. Result: it's perceived as low social value behavior. The man with relational intelligence creates strategic voids that generate curiosity. Result: it's perceived as high-value behavior that activates unconscious pursuit. Perhaps you recognize these patterns in your own life. Perhaps you remember that time you were deeply interested in someone and started sending daily messages, constantly checking for a reply, feeling that knot in your stomach when you saw they read them but didn't answer, or when you organized a perfect outing, with every detail planned, showing excessive interest, only to receive a lukewarm response, or that moment you felt the uncontrollable urge to reply immediately to her message, canceling previous plans to be available, only to discover she responded hours later without the same urgency. Don't forget that time you sent several consecutive messages when you got no reply, justifying each additional text, feeling your value plummet with every unanswered blue bubble. Or even today, when you check her social media profile multiple times, interpreting every post as a possible message for you, in a pattern that repeats and reinforces itself. It's like a satellite desperately orbiting a planet, consuming all its fuel in frenetic movements, while the planet remains motionless, exerting attraction without apparent effort, simply by its mass and presence. The common man actively pursues, showing all his cards immediately. The magnetic man creates space for her to move towards him, revealing his hand gradually. He who pursues loses. He who generates pursuit wins. The deepest and most hidden cost goes beyond lost opportunities. Every time you obviously pursue, something fundamental erodes within you, your self-worth perception. The external dynamic simply reflects an internal truth. You pursue because unconsciously you don't believe you deserve to be pursued. And with each new pursuit, you reinforce this invisible belief. Magnetic men don't avoid pursuing out of superficial strategy, but because they internally know their value doesn't require constant validation. But identifying the problem is just the first step. Now I'm going to show you exactly what to do, step by step, in 3 situations you'll face this week, starting with the central technique that changes the entire game. The strategic void technique works on a fundamental psychological principle. We value what is difficult to obtain and pursue what we perceive as scarce. In practical terms, it consists of 5 very specific steps. First, you generate a real but limited point of connection. This creates a genuine hook, a spark of authentic interest. You'll notice clear indicators of initial attraction. Then, against all intuition, you introduce a calculated void, emotional distance, communicative space, strategic pauses. The result is immediate, creation of productive uncertainty. Then you observe the response, increased initiative on her part, attempts to re-establish connection, growing emotional investment. Finally, you selectively reward this pursuit with calibrated attention, never complete, always partial. Most act with anxious hunter energy. They pursue, insist, demonstrate. You must act with magnetic lighthouse energy. You attract, intrigue, select. The difference isn't subtle, it's fundamental. He who pursues more attracts less. He who pursues less attracts more. Imagine you're at a professional networking event. A spacious hall, lively conversations, that mix of opportunity and nervousness in the air. You identify an attractive woman who also seems professionally interesting. You exchange brief glances 3 times in half an hour. Most people approach immediately, interrupting any conversation, introducing themselves with too much energy, asking consecutive questions without space for deep answers, handing out business cards within the first 2 minutes. The more they talk, the more transparent their interest becomes. The atmosphere subtly changes. She responds cordially, but without real enthusiasm. The conversation becomes mechanical, predictable. But you choose the opposite path. You notice her presence, but continue your current conversation with full attention. When you eventually coincide near the bar or in a group, you establish brief eye contact before directing it elsewhere. You exchange a few relevant professional words without obvious compliments. After a genuine but brief connection, you casually mention that you need to greet someone else. You withdraw at the peak of interest, not at the low point. Now the dynamic has completely changed. She scans the room for you. She strategically positions herself to coincide again. She initiates the second conversation. She asks questions to keep you talking. You pursued nothing, but you generated everything. Because in attraction, less is more. He who retreats advances. Now apply this same principle to personal and romantic contexts. You're on a first date with someone you're genuinely interested in. A pleasant restaurant, that mix of expectation and mutual evaluation floating in the air. The average man behaves with excessive emotional availability. He talks without significant pauses, reveals too much personal information too soon, extends the date as long as possible, suggests a second date before the first one ends, sends a message upon getting home to thank her for the time. The interaction seems superficially fluid, but it lacks magnetic tension, productive mystery. Instead, you maintain genuine conversation, but with comfortable spaces of silence. You share personal aspects selectively, leaving areas to discover. At the peak of connection, about an hour and a half later, you say, "I have to leave in 20 minutes, but this has been really pleasant." You notice how her energy changes, how the conversation intensifies in those last few minutes. You say goodbye with brief contact, without specific promises about a next meeting. "When will I see you again?" she asks, changing the fundamental dynamic. "I have a busy week, but I'll text you," you reply calmly. You deliberately wait 2 days before suggesting the second meeting. The response is immediate, her interest clearly intensified. You didn't pursue anything, but you generated everything. Because he who needs less receives more. In digital environments and on social media, this dynamic is exponentially amplified. Here, every interaction is recorded, every response time is measurable, every pattern becomes visible to both parties. The anxious man replies to messages instantly at any hour, with elaborate and lengthy texts, uses excessive emojis, double texts when there's no reply, immediately views stories, likes every post. The digital result is identical to in-person. Progressive devaluation, loss of interest, eventual distancing. You establish completely different patterns. You respond at variable times, never predictably. Your messages are concise, interesting but incomplete, always leaving a thread to resolve. You end conversations at unexpected moments. You view stories selectively, not chronologically. You like strategically, never systematically. You don't post to impress, but to intrigue. The effect is immediate. She starts adapting her behavior to yours. She replies faster, elaborates more, restarts ended conversations. She seeks your digital attention in creative ways. The screen simply reflects a universal truth. What is scarce becomes valuable. He who is everywhere is nowhere. But pay attention, there are 3 dangerous traps when applying this principle. The first mistake is confusing strategic distance with artificial coldness. This happens when you simply act disinterested without having generated prior interest. Result? There's nothing to pursue because initial connection never existed. It seems like a sophisticated strategy, but in reality, it's just basic disconnection. The correction is simple. Always establish a genuine point of interest before creating any void. Second mistake, inconsistency in the pattern. Many alternate between strategic distance and obvious pursuit because their need for validation eventually emerges. This leads to confusion and loss of credibility. To avoid it, maintain consistent behavior, especially when you feel the urge to break it. Third mistake, the most subtle and dangerous, creating a void without real value behind it. This is treacherous because it seems to work initially. It generates temporary curiosity, even momentary pursuit, but collapses when it's discovered there's no substance to back the strategy. If you perceive that attraction quickly dissipates after prolonged contact, immediately focus on developing authentic personal value, not just presentation techniques. This works perfectly at the tactical level, but there's a deeper, almost philosophical level that separates those who apply superficial techniques from those who truly master the dynamic of attraction at a fundamental level. Most people think attraction works as a voluntary transaction. 2 people consciously decide to be mutually interested based on a rational evaluation of qualities. We've been taught that attraction is primarily visual, that it's based on physical attributes, that it arises from obvious compatibility, that it responds to direct demonstration of interest. But when you observe real behavior more closely, you notice something contradictory. The very people who claim to want direct no-games relationships respond with greater interest to moderate uncertainty than to absolute certainty. This doesn't make sense according to what we've been taught, and that's precisely where most people stop analyzing. The fundamental truth is completely opposite. Deep attraction is not a conscious decision, but an unconscious response. We don't pursue what we decide to want, but what our primitive brain perceives as valuable due to its apparent scarcity. And this changes absolutely everything, because it means that the behaviors we instinctively adopt to generate attraction, pursuit, constant availability, obvious interest, are exactly those that diminish it at a neurological level. Emotional gravity doesn't work by demonstrating, but by being. It's not he who invests the most effort that attracts, but he who needs the least validation. The evidence is everywhere once you learn to recognize it. Observe any couple dynamic where there's an imbalance of interest. Invariably, he who shows less need exerts greater attraction. It's not coincidence or injustice. It's a fundamental psychological law. Evolutionary psychology studies confirm that we value what we perceive as scarce more, not just in material objects, but especially in emotional connections. A revealing experiment showed that people initially classified as average in attractiveness were re-rated significantly higher when presented as selective or hard to impress. The same face, the same person, different perception based exclusively on apparent emotional accessibility. Think about that relationship where you had total certainty about the other person's interest. What did you feel? Security, comfort, peace of mind, but rarely that intense magnetism, that productive obsession, that need to conquer that defines deep attraction. Now recall that connection where there was obvious interest but never complete certainty. The intensity was completely different. Why? Because strategic uncertainty activates brain circuits linked to reward and motivation. That absolute certainty simply deactivates. Scarcity doesn't create value, it reveals value. So, how do you internalize this perspective at an identity level, not just as a superficial technique? The transformation requires a fundamental change in self-perception. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to prove value to be chosen, and you begin to perceive yourself as someone who constantly evaluates whether others deserve your full attention. It's not arrogant acting, it's a legitimate standard. When you fully internalize this paradigm, you begin to feel genuine tranquility in the face of an immediate lack of response. You don't compulsively check your phone. Instead, you forget to. You don't strategically plan every move. You simply naturally prioritize your interests without artificial calculation. People perceive this emotional self-sufficiency as unexplainable magnetism. Situations that once generated anxiety now produce multiple opportunities, and most importantly, your value no longer fluctuates based on external validation. It remains consistent regardless of others' responses. True mastery manifests when non-pursuit ceases to be a conscious strategy and becomes a natural expression of internal value. The beginner applies distancing techniques while internally still needing validation. The master simply exists in his own center of gravity, attracting naturally without perceptible effort. Your value doesn't increase by pursuing. Your value is revealed by not needing to pursue. Now that you understand the fundamental principle, it's time to transform this understanding into a concrete system. I'm going to give you 3 specific tools and a detailed plan for the next 7 days that will turn this philosophy into immediate practical results. The first tool is called calibrated scarcity. Basically, it's the strategic management of your presence, attention, and availability in any interaction. You use it specifically when you perceive initial interest, when the connection seems naturally established, or when the other person shows clear signs of attraction. Here's how it works in detail. First, you establish a genuine brief connection with sustained eye contact, focused conversation, present energy. Then you introduce a deliberate reduction of availability. I have to leave in 30 minutes. I can only reply briefly now. I'll be offline for the weekend. Finally, you exit while interest is high, never low. For example, when she asks, "What are you doing this weekend?" you reply exactly, "I have interesting plans, I'll tell you next week." Don't elaborate, don't reciprocate by asking about her plans. That calibrated precision is what generates impact. The effect is immediate, increased curiosity and subsequently, increased initiative on her part to maintain connection. The second tool is progressive investment. It's the art of creating situations where she invests more and more energy, time, and emotion in the interaction, while you maintain proportional but slightly lesser investment. You apply it when basic attraction already exists, when communication has been regularly established, or when you seek to intensify an existing connection. The specific process: you start with minimal, almost imperceptible requests. "Pass me that glass." "Hold this for a moment." Then you escalate to requests that require greater investment. "Help me decide something. I need your opinion on this." Subsequently, you create situations where she must make a moderate effort. Slightly complicated meeting locations, times that require her to adjust, conversations that demand elaboration of her ideas. For example, when planning a meeting, you say, "I'll be near Polanco on Thursday. Can you meet me there around 7?" You don't offer to go to her convenient location. You don't ask what's most comfortable for her. You'll observe how she adapts to your parameters while progressively increasing her emotional investment. The third tool is intermittent reinforcement. It's the most powerful mechanism for creating positive addiction to your presence. You use it when attraction is already established, when you seek to maintain long-term interest, or when familiarity threatens to diminish initial magnetism. Precise implementation requires constant variability. Sometimes you respond immediately, other times you wait hours. Certain days you show complete attention, others you maintain perceptible distance. Occasionally you offer explicit affection. Frequently you keep it implicit. The absolute key is the impossibility of predicting the pattern. When she sends an important message, sometimes you reply, "This is really interesting. Let's talk more when we see each other." Other times you elaborate a complete response. The impossibility of predicting your reaction creates a continuous state of attention and interest on her part, much more powerful than constant but predictable attention. Inconsistent value is worth more than consistent value. Now I'm going to give you a precise plan for the next 7 days. It's not abstract theory. It's a concrete protocol that generates immediate results. For the first 2 days, your sole focus is to implement calibrated scarcity in every interaction. Don't try to apply all tools simultaneously, just this one. Every time you receive a message from someone you're interested in, and it will happen at least 3 times in these 2 days, deliberately wait between 20 minutes and 2 hours before replying, regardless of your actual availability. No matter the context, romantic, friendly, professional, whatever. What you'll notice: initial discomfort on the first day, a feeling of artificiality when holding back your immediate response, progressive stabilization on the second day, greater naturalness in prioritizing your activities before responding. Initially, you'll feel anxiety over possible lost opportunities. This is completely normal, but after applying it 4 or 5 times, you'll experience a significant reduction in reactive urgency. You'll perceive subtle changes, more elaborate responses, follow-up questions, greater communicative initiative from them. Pay special attention to the increasing length of their messages compared to yours. On days 3 and 4, you add progressive investment while maintaining the first tool. Now you manage 2 mechanisms simultaneously. When you interact in person, you not only control your availability but also request small actions from her. Could you look up that place on your phone? Recommend something specific from the menu. Tell me more about that interesting comment. The combination creates a synergistic effect of growing attraction. Here, the game visibly changes because you activate basic psychological reciprocity. The more she invests in you, the more she unconsciously values you. You'll notice a change in your own mindset. Less need to impress, greater comfort evaluating real compatibility. You'll observe a modification in her behavior, a greater desire to demonstrate value, increased questions about your preferences, active seeking of your approval. You'll primarily perceive a transformation in the dynamic. She works for your attention, not the other way around. If you experience urges to return to previous patterns of pursuit, it's a clear sign that the process is working. Adjust by reducing communication if you feel anxiety about a response. Days 5, 6, and 7 are for refinement and integration of intermittent reinforcement, completing the system. Now you operate with a complete protocol. Important message, delayed but significant response, casual interaction, complete attention followed by strategic distancing. Her direct request, selective acceptance based on real merit, not automatic availability. Specifically observe 3 emerging patterns. Increased questions about your personal life, a sign of intensified curiosity. Increased contact initiated by her, an indicator of unconscious pursuit. Comments about your mystery or inability to fully read you. Confirmation of attraction through productive uncertainty. Adjust your availability based on this feedback. Less accessibility if you perceive complacency. More connection if you notice distancing. At this point, you'll experience a tangible transformation in the relational dynamic. It's not imagination or projection. It's a measurable result in others' behavior. And this is just the beginning of the process. But pay maximum attention now, because there are 3 critical errors that can completely destroy the progress achieved, even when you correctly apply the technical tools. Error number 1, inconsistency across communication platforms. It seems like a minor detail, but is strategically devastating. It happens when you maintain calculated distance in direct messages, but simultaneously demonstrate obvious interest on social media, validating every post, viewing every story, commenting on every update. Immediate consequence: total loss of credibility in your perceived value. Medium-term consequence: classification as an incongruent person who artificially manipulates attention. The precise correction is to maintain absolute coherence across all platforms, remembering that your digital behavior is as revealing as your in-person behavior. Second error: reactive overcompensation to signs of disinterest. Many correctly apply the system until they face the first sign of apparent distancing: an unanswered message, a canceled date, reduced interaction. At that moment, they completely abandon the strategy and revert to desperate pursuit, revealing that the previous behavior was an act, not identity. The exact solution: interpret negative signals as an opportunity to demonstrate greater internal value, not as a crisis requiring intensified pursuit. Third error, the most devastating: turning absence into the sole value proposition. This is the most subtle trap because it seems to work superficially. Strategic distance generates initial curiosity, but without parallel development of multidimensional attractiveness, interesting conversation, meaningful experiences, unique perspectives, it becomes simple absence without magnetic value. The fundamental correction is to use the space created by non-pursuit to develop genuine personal substance that justifies interest when connection occurs. Distance doesn't create value, distance reveals value. And before we finish, it's crucial that you internalize a fundamental point that defines this entire system of magnetic attraction. Let's recap, but not as a technical summary, but as the 4 pillars that now define how you operate in the relational world. First pillar: obvious pursuit destroys attraction because it reveals a value imbalance, handing over complete power to the pursued while diminishing your own perceived and real value. Second pillar: strategic scarcity of attention, presence, and emotional availability generates greater attraction than any direct demonstration of interest, activating fundamental psychological mechanisms of valuation. Third pillar: deep attraction is not a conscious decision, but an unconscious neurological response to perceived value, operating through mechanisms opposite to those we intuitively apply in relationships. Fourth pillar: the integrated system of calibrated scarcity, progressive investment, and intermittent reinforcement creates sustainable magnetism when it naturally emerges from authentic internal value, not from superficial manipulation. These 4 pillars are not abstract theory. They are the practical architecture of magnetic attraction. And now you have the complete implementation map. Gravity doesn't push, gravity attracts. Here's your immediate challenge, and it starts exactly now. In the next 24 hours, not tomorrow, not next week, in the next 24 hours, an interaction with someone you're interested in will occur. It could be an unexpected message, a casual encounter, or contact you initiate yourself, but it will definitely happen. When it happens, and you'll know exactly when because you'll feel that familiar urge to show obvious interest, I want you to apply calibrated scarcity in its purest form, not a diluted or partial version. The complete implementation I've shown you. You don't need to announce you're trying something new. You don't need to explain your behavior. That's precisely the beauty of the system. Simply respond with deliberate delay, keep your message concise but interesting, and end the interaction on a high note, never a low one. Because when you do this, 3 things will inevitably happen. You'll notice an immediate change in the communication response pattern. You'll experience a significant reduction in validation anxiety, and you'll confirm that magnetic power was always available. You were just using the opposite approach to the effective one. This is your real test moment, your opportunity to prove to yourself, not to me, not to anyone else, to yourself, that this isn't abstract theory. It's fundamental psychological reality. And after implementing it, come back here and tell me specifically how the energetic dynamic of the interaction changed. I want to know exactly what transformation you perceived in your own sense of personal power. Comment exactly this word for word. Gravity doesn't pursue, it attracts. This isn't just a simple comment. It's a declaration of deep understanding. It's a recognition code. It shows that you didn't just watch 28 minutes of content, but that you absorbed the fundamental principle. That you're not part of the majority who passively consume information only to immediately forget it. That you belong to the magnetic ones, those who understand that true attraction operates through principles opposite to the obvious ones. This is our shared password. our identification protocol. I will personally read every comment, and I will know precisely who understood the system and who simply skimmed over it. Comment now. And since you made it to the end of this video, there's something specific I intentionally didn't mention until now. In the next video, I'm going to show you the only communication pattern that activates immediate attraction in in-person conversation. It's about unconscious facial micro-expressions that connect directly with what we've seen today, but from a completely unexpected angle. It involves applied neuroscience of instant attraction, and it explains why some people generate immediate magnetism in the first 30 seconds of interaction, while others require months to achieve the same effect. But that's a topic for our next conversation. I won't say more now because it would spoil the full reveal. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next video comes out this Sunday. Remember the gravity metaphor I mentioned at the beginning? Most people try to create attraction through direct action, constant movement, obvious pursuit. Now you understand the fundamental truth. It's not about frantic external activity. It's about consistent internal density. You don't need to constantly pursue to demonstrate value. You are the center of your own gravitational system. And when you operate from that internal certainty, the world naturally begins to orbit around you. True attraction doesn't pursue. True attraction magnetizes. Now go and show who you truly are.